Imagine a golden dawn breaking over the African savanna, an eternal stage where life is dictated by the harshest laws of creation. Here, the boundary between predator and prey is an invisible yet unbreakable wall, forged through millions of years of evolution. We are all too familiar with the sight of impala herds fleeing through clouds of dust at the mere shadow of a feline, a dance of survival choreographed between speed and death. But hidden within the tall grasses of Kruger National Park, a staggering event occurred, defying every biological law known to man. An impala mother, with eyes usually reserved for spotting threats, stood guarding a tiny, shivering, orphaned creature. It was not one of her own kind. It was a lion cub. This is not merely a story of survival. It is a symphony of compassion, where a courageous heart chose to step beyond primal fear to rewrite destiny. We are about to embark on the journey of Grace and Leo, a journey proving that in a natural world rife with cruelty, love can still sprout in the most unlikely of places, and once it takes root, it changes the order of the kingdom forever. To understand why Grace chose to stay, we must look through the lens of her sacrifice. In the wild, the safety of an impala lies in numbers. The strength of the herd is the only shield against predators. By choosing to stay by Leo's side, Grace essentially signed her own warrant of exile. Alone on the vast plains, she surrendered the protection of her kind to become a solitary target, more vulnerable than ever before. The lion cub, named Leo by park rangers, was only 3 days old when Grace found him huddled near the remains of a poaching site. His mother was gone, and Leo's feeble cries were nothing more than a dinner bell for hungry hyenas. But Grace, who had recently lost her own fawn to a leopard, seemed to recognize a familiar frequency of grief in Leo's call. Instead of leaping away in terror, she stepped closer. She used her wet nose to gently touch his downy fur, a gesture of comfort that should have been a death sentence for a herbivore. The first few weeks were a biological miracle. Grace began to nurse Leo. Although impala milk is not designed for the rapid growth of a primary predator, it was enough to sustain the flickering spark of life in Leo's body. Rangers held their breath as they watched through lenses while Grace licked and cleaned the savanna dust from the cub's golden ears. However, the challenge was not just physical but deeply social. Other impalas in the herd stood hundreds of meters away, snorting and watching with utter disbelief. In their eyes, he was a growing monster, but in Grace's eyes, he was simply a child in need of protection. As Leo grew, an instinctual tension began to emerge. Imagine Leo at 4 months old, attempting to play with other young impalas. Driven by instinct, he would pounce, his sharp claws accidentally scratching the thin skin of his playmates. Immediately, Grace would intervene, not with fear, but with a firm, decisive nudge to Leo's shoulder. She was teaching a predator how to be gentle before he even realized what he was born to be. Grace began to lead Leo to the edges of areas where other predators had left carcasses, encouraging him to eat meat while she stood guard, her ears constantly twitching to scan for danger. It was a grand paradox of nature, a gentle herbivore raising a mighty warrior, a peaceful soul teaching a future ruler about the sanctity of life. Rangers noticed that Leo never developed the characteristic hunting stare when observing the impala herd. He watched them with a strange, calm curiosity. Leo was a lion who believed he was the protector of the herd, because the only mother he knew was the very soul of that herd. By the time Leo reached 8 months old, the physical disparity between mother and son became an undeniable truth. He was no longer a clumsy cub. The first tufts of a mane began to appear around his neck like a golden halo, and he now weighed 3 times as much as Grace. This was the moment zoologists predicted an inevitable tragedy. They believed that one day, the killer instinct suppressed in Leo's blood would awaken, that he would wake up, look at Grace, and no longer see a mother, but a meal. However, in the thickets of the savanna, something extraordinary was happening. Leo was undergoing a profound identity crisis. There was a fateful afternoon when a group of young impalas was playing near a watering hole. Leo, feeling a surge of energy in his muscles, began to stalk. It was a perfect approach, textbook for a big cat. Belly pressed to the ground, eyes locked on the target with deadly focus. The rangers held their breath, fearing the fated moment had arrived. But before Leo could pounce, Grace stepped directly into his line of sight. She didn't run. She stood tall, defiant, and looked Leo straight in the eye. A suffocating silence hung in the air. In that moment, where life and death were separated by a hair's breadth, Leo froze. He looked at the herd, then back at his mother. And then, in an act that melted the hearts of the observers, Leo let out a soft mew and rubbed his massive head against Grace's hip. He chose kinship over the call of his blood. Still, the savannah is never a place that forgives those who break the rules. A wandering leopard, scenting a lone impala separated from the protection of a large herd, decided to attack at twilight. Normally, an impala's only weapon is speed. But this time, Grace had a unique bodyguard. Leo, though still young, did not hesitate. He did not flee like the other herbivores. He charged straight toward the enemy. Leo didn't kill the leopard, for his upbringing lacked the lethal training of his own kind. His towering size and powerful protective roar were more than enough to send the leopard retreating into the shadows. For the first time, the Rangers realized this was no longer about Grace saving Leo. Now, Leo had become Grace's shield. They had formed a strange symbiotic relationship that completely bypassed the standard food chain. They were a family of two, standing firm against a world that could not understand them. This period showed us that identity is not just defined by who you are born as. It is shaped by who loved you and who you choose to love in return. The climax of this extraordinary story occurred when Leo was nearly 2 years old. He was now a majestic beast, yet his soul still bore the mark of the gentleness Grace had instilled in him. However, the savannah is not always peaceful. 3 nomadic male lions, war-scarred veterans hungry for territory, invaded Grace's grazing lands. These were real lions, driven by the instinct for dominance and intense hunger. In their eyes, Grace was merely an easy lunch, and Leo was a bizarre rival to be eliminated immediately. The 3 intruders began to coordinate their attack, surrounding the mismatched pair. Rangers prepared to intervene, certain that the nomads would tear Grace apart and kill Leo to assert their power. But it was then that the unthinkable happened. Grace, sensing the overwhelming bloodlust from 3 masses of muscle and claws, did not hide behind her adopted son. Instead, she stepped forward. With a body pathetically small compared to the giants before her, Grace stamped her hooves and snorted defiantly. It was an act of suicidal love, a proud defiance of a prey animal standing before dominant predators. But Leo would not let his mother stand alone. Witnessing his mother threatened, a new power rose within him. These were no longer play hunting games. This was the moment the cub truly became a king. Leo stepped up, his massive frame completely shielding Grace. He didn't just snarl. He let out a thunderous roar that shook the ancient acacia trees and paralyzed the air. That roar carried the majesty of a lion and the iron will of a protector. The 3 nomadic lions recoiled in shock. They were bewildered by the unthinkable courage of the impala and the absolute ferocity of the young lion guarding her. Sensing an unnatural and threatening energy from Leo's resolve, the 3 intruders eventually slinked away into the brush. This event forced the Rangers to make a heartbreaking decision. Leo was now too powerful for the impala's territory. His presence inadvertently turned the area into a focal point for bloody conflicts. They decided to relocate Leo to a different area where a pride of lionesses was in need of a new leader. The separation happened in silence. Grace stood watching the truck disappear behind a line of trees, her ears pricked forward as if listening to one last goodbye. Leo watched his mother through the bars of the transport until her silhouette was nothing more than a tiny brown speck on the horizon. Many believed the story would end there, that Leo would become a normal lion and Grace would return to her herd. But nature has its own way of remembering. Leo did not forget. He carried a precious legacy to his new pride, the Grace Protocol, a lesson in compassion that no king of the savannah had ever learned. Years passed since that quiet separation. Leo grew to become one of the most successful and magnificent kings in the history of the reserve. He possessed a massive frame, a mane like burning gold, and the absolute respect of his pride. However, Rangers noticed something entirely unprecedented in the behavior of Leo's pride. While other lions hunted any herbivore in sight, Leo's pride, though master hunters of zebra and wildebeest, absolutely never touched an impala. Even during the harshest droughts when food was scarce and the impala herds were at their weakest, Leo let his pride past them, as if an invisible decree had been issued. This kind is family. Leo passed the lesson of compassion down to his entire pride. He taught the lionesses that the true strength of a ruler lies not just in the lethal strike, but in the power to choose life over death. In a world we often dismiss as red in tooth and claw, Leo and Grace created an oasis of peace. Leo proved that one individual can change the culture of an entire species, simply by remembering what the heart was taught. The story reached its final, poignant note when Grace reached the limits of time. She had lived a long and peaceful life by Impala standards, protected by the reputation of her royal adopted son. One misty morning, under the shade of an ancient acacia tree, Grace breathed her last. And at that very moment, something extraordinary happened. Leo, then dozens of miles away in his own territory, was seen standing alone on a high rocky outcrop. He turned his gaze toward his mother's old grazing lands and let out a long, mournful, echoing roar. It was not a roar of the hunt, nor a roar of territory. It was a sonic eulogy, a final tribute to the creature who saw a son instead of a meal. As we close this journey, we must ask ourselves, if a lion and an impala can find a connection that transcends the very boundaries of survival, what is stopping us as humans? Grace and Leo prove that love is a force more powerful than biological instinct. Gentleness is not a weakness. It is a type of power that can rewrite the laws of nature. If this story has touched your heart, share it as a reminder that peace is always possible when we choose understanding over fear. Stay with us to discover more beautiful moments where nature bared its soul. Because in the end, if a king like Leo can remember his mother's kindness, perhaps we, too, can learn to show kindness to one another. Thank you for listening. And remember, no matter who you were born to be, you always have the choice of who you will become.